Welcome. I see some people are still joining us, but I want to take this moment to welcome you all to the Mockingbird family, a community approach to family-based care. It's so great to have you all here today. I'm excited about the next hour we have together. My name's Chris Skinner, and I am the Mockingbird family lead in Australia, and I work for the Stride team at Life Without Barriers. And we have a panelist of amazing people here with us today. They'll introduce themselves as we go throughout the webinar. But first and foremost, I really would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the respective lands we meet on today. For me, I'm in the Lake Macquarie, New South Wales region, and I want to pay respects to elders past, present, and the emerging leaders, and I'm on a Wabakal land today. I also want to extend that respect to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and First Nations people joining us online, whether in Australia or around the world. Fantastic to have you here. So I'm going to give you a quick roadmap for the webinar today, and then a little bit of housekeeping before we get into it. We love that you've joined. So Mockingbird Family is an innovative, evidence-informed model, and we're going to start off by giving a bit of an overview of what that is. There's a broad audience here. Some may know what it is and others may not. So we're going to give some time to that. Then we're actually going to hear from the people who are part of this program. So the lived experience of carers, of staff, and those who've been implementing this in Australia and around the world. From that point, we're actually going to hear from two wonderful researchers, Helen McLaren and Michelle Jones, who have spent a few years studying the implementation of Mockingbird Family in Australia and hear their insights and observations. I do have an apology from one of our panelists today. So Hayley Bridwell from the Mockingbird Society, all the way over in Seattle, Washington, has unfortunately had some health issues arise this morning. She's profusely sorry for not being able to join us, and I've just told her it's okay from down under, and I'm sure we'll be understanding of that. So very quickly, just to navigate and get the best experience of this webinar today, we actually are going to be recording this, so you'll be able to have the opportunity to access it again, and we'll be able to post that for the ability to share to others that you might want to see this as well. We don't have the chat feature in operation today, but we will have the Q&A feature. So if you did want to ask a question, there should be an icon at the bottom of your screen, and your question will be posted to a team that will be able to answer the questions that you have, or we will come back and be able to answer them at the end of the webinar. In the event that we don't have time, because we have a very full program, we'll certainly get back to you via email. Also, just to, I guess, in terms of viewing, you have some options at the top right of your screen. It says view, so you can either spotlight the speaker, or you can have the full gallery of speakers today. The final thing is, if you are logged out for any reason or kicked out of the Zoom, then you just need to return back to the email and the Zoom link that you would have received to be able to re-enter the webinar. All right, all that housekeeping out of the way, we're now going to move into what is Mockingbird Family. And I'm going to actually start by sharing a quick animation. It's about 2 minutes long, and it will give a broad overview, and then we'll drill down a bit deeper into that. So we're going to share our screen and show that video right now.
All kids deserve a safe, loving and nurturing home. Life Without Barriers has introduced Mockingbird Family to help support kids like me. Mockingbird Family connects caring adult carers with kids in out-of-home care. It gives kids like me a bigger community and helps me stay connected to my parents, brothers and sisters, and things that are important to me like my culture. So I have more people to learn from, lean on and build relationships with. Our carers have people to get help from and have more time to connect to other carers who know about looking after kids in out-of-home care. For something that makes a big difference, Mockingbird Family is pretty simple. A group of carers form a group called a constellation that includes all the kids in their care and gets supported by an experienced carer called a hub home provider, sort of like grandparents or an auntie. The hub home is a place where us kids can go, where there is someone who cares about us and where we feel safe and belong. We can have sleepovers, and they are there to help us, pick us up from school, and organise activities that we love, like movies or barbecues in the park. My mum and dad and brothers and sisters can come to these activities too. It's great to have everyone together. Mockingbird Family is a pretty awesome idea, and it really works. It supports us and supports carers, so they stay around, which is better for all of us. Less moving around, fewer new homes, and respite only with people we know. Plus, I get to stay at the same school and footy team. We have the chance to be part of a connected family and community that values us for who we are. A Mockingbird Family.
Okay, so that is a broad overview of Mockingbird Family. And I'm going to drill down a little bit deeper. So because Haley wasn't able to join us today, I wanted to quickly mention, so the Mockingbird Society in the United States have actually come up with this model in 2004. And they're an organisation much like Create in Australia, so a youth advocacy organisation. And Jim Theophilus actually was looking at the system that was available for the youth in America at the time and started to question, is this the best way to do things? Are there some things we can learn from just community life? And it ended up launching Mockingbird Family in 2004. And so from that point, that is reached across the United States and through to the UK. You can now find Mockingbird Family in Canada, Japan, Netherlands, and Australia. So that's the reach, and at the moment, we're just bordering on the size of 200 constellations, which I'm going to explain what that is just a moment. The philosophy behind this, and we're just going to look at the next slide, is a well-known saying, it takes a village to raise a child. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. But the idea is that for children and young people who are in care, they have a unique experience of life compared to their peers. So the idea is that maybe there's a unique community that is needed for them to be able to give them the best chance and be their best selves. The way Mockingbird Family does this, we're going to look at the next graphic and show you how it operates. So right here, what you have is called a constellation. So a constellation is a community of carers, children and young people, and the staff that are involved to help support. Right there in the middle, you have the hub home provider. So that's an experienced carer that's tasked with facilitating this group, and they help provide respite, could be practical supports of transport and emotional social supports for the carers. Someone to call that the carers are having a bad day and they can call up, or for the children to go to their house. They're seen as like a grandparent or auntie and uncle figure. Next around there, you see foster homes or kinship homes. So they're called satellite households or satellite families. So it could be either foster or kinship. And we normally have 6 to 10 families that are a part of a constellation. Anything more than 10 starts to become a bit of a crowd, and we want to make sure we have a good solid, 6 families to 10 is a great size. So what they do is they start to form relationships with each other in a close geographical location. And the idea of having like experience and like relationships increases your network of supports and network of information exchange, and we see great benefits coming out of this. On the sides of the screen, you can actually see the family home, adoptive home, and chosen home. So we know the family is so important for children and young people, and Mockingbird looks to incorporate family, whether parents or siblings, wherever possible and as much as we can. So we definitely have family involved in, social events that happen within Constellation in a very normative way. And I know of some incredible examples where A mother of a child has come along to a social event and she actually did some balloon art. And what an amazing experience for that child to see her mother thrive, in something that she's really good at in a community that is really well supported. The adoptive home and the chosen home. So they are, if a child was to move into an adoption space or to leave care into their chosen place of living, it doesn't mean that they are cut off from the constellation. They'll technically not be part of the system as such or the constellation, but the relationships that are formed don't just end because of the status change. Lastly, but not least, we have the Mockingbird Family Liaison Officer and the case manager or caseworker, whatever term we might use. So we don't set up this community and just set and forget. We have the liaison officer that helps supervise and support the hub home, and also the whole constellation and provide support. The case manager will also be involved with the families, so the children and the carers. And through that, they're able to actually be able to be alleviated of some of their workload so they can focus on only the things that they can do. Just this next slide and the final one from me. So some of the activities that are going on in this constellation is, as I mentioned, planned and emergency respite. So it increases the respite options within that cohort of carers. And it's certainly with the hub home, but it could be with the other satellite families as well. But not just the quantity of respite options, but the quality in terms of children not being shipped to places that they don't know or people they're just meeting. They know the people in this community and this constellation. Friendships are also developed across the constellation with children and young people, so they have a more normative experience of some of that short break or that time out. There's also a monthly constellation meeting. So the whole constellation comes together, sometimes with all carers, sometimes with carers and children. And that monthly meeting is about connecting in, a bit of a welfare check. How is everyone going? It's an opportunity to provide training that is targeted and meaningful for that constellation. And just a time to have some fun. It's about building that constellation culture. Through the activities, we also have some social support and information exchange. So you're broadening your ability to socially engage and also to exchange information. I know some amazing stories where just one household shared information about a dance class for children with autism, and it made all the difference for the world, but it started with just that linking of information. Then peer interaction. So obviously, there's the benefit of having peers that know what it's like to walk in your shoes. So carers know what it's like to be a carer. And children and young people in care know what it's like to be children and young people in care. And they have a richer experience because of that empathy. The last thing is the social and cultural events. So every quarter there's a social or cultural event. It's a big celebration, and that's to broaden experiences for the children, but also just to build up that community that we have. And all of this has amounted to an increase in placement stability, in carer retention, keeping siblings together, some better outcomes educationally, and even to the point of really helping with carer recruitment. We'll talk about some of those details a bit later. Now I'm going to introduce you to Michelle Creed, and she is from Ozchild. And we're going to hear about the actual lived experience. So Michelle is the liaison officer for Ozchild, and Ozchild have just launched their first constellation 1 month ago, literally almost just 1 month to the day. And so we're going to hear about the early experience of implementation from Michelle. So welcome, Michelle. I'm going to ask you a few questions and love to hear from you.
Thanks, Chris.
So the first question I wanted to ask you, Michelle, Ozchild being the newest organisation, what has really helped with the implementation process?
It's really helped Ozchild in implementing Mockingbird. Has been a massive help that multiple levels of our organisation have really been on board and motivated, invested in the model. all the way up from the board down to staff like myself on the ground. It's really also aligned really well with us as an organisation. Our strategic plan in terms of being an evidence-informed model, all the way down to the carer support kind of perspective that we have in our work, and in providing opportunities for our carers to support one another. So that really was aligned really well, which helped massively when it came to getting things going. We also were able, in the lucky position of identifying our hub home provider very early on. And she's a unique kind of part of our team. And that was a massive help because it really set forth a whole plan about where our constellation would be, which helped massively in the planning and all of the work that had to happen in the implementation phase about identifying potential constellation members. We're able to do that from early on, which made that a lot easier. And also the initial training that we came to, the immersion training, it was wonderful to hear from other hub home providers and other Mockingbird liaison officers like myself. I remember the feeling in the room when we came together for that training, and we all came away feeling really energized, motivated. It was really insightful hearing from them what their perspective was, their experience, and really set us forth on a really great pathway in our implementation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Michelle. And yes, you're definitely unique. Often we hear one of the trickiest pieces of the puzzle with Mockingbird is finding that hub home provider. And Glenda, who wasn't able to be here today, it was just a absolute jewel to find. So that's great. But really hearing the organisation as a whole behind it and on board, and hearing from those other hub homes, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what were some of the earlier benefits that you saw, even just as the constellation was starting to form and the carers and children were starting to connect?
Well, the connections is the best benefit that I can think of. Seeing people come together, really motivated themselves, on top of their busy lives of working, providing care to kids who oftentimes can be, require additional needs. Seeing them really wanting to be there. They were really invested in joining, and really open to connections with one another. So it's been lovely watching them come together. And there also was something really special about being in the carers community. All of them were so close to Glenda's place that there was just something really special about that for them, it just really made that connection even that much more easier. We're a big, catchment area across Australia. It's a big part of Melbourne, but to create a group that's for this group in their community, I think that was really, you could feel that from the initial get-go, how special that was. And a huge benefit to carers, just makes it so much more accessible to come to the monthly meetings and to do the social events, come together in their community. It also meant that, in terms of Auschild's perspective, gave us the opportunity to demonstrate to our carer pool across the board, even if they weren't in our catchment, how invested we are in supporting carers, and that we are striving to implement new to Auschchild ways of connecting carers with one another. And that, I hope that conveys to our carers just how much we value them, that we wouldn't be anywhere without them. In terms of the wider pool who aren't in the constellation as well, it's really helped us to think about how could we take the best of parts of Mockingbird and think about how could we do that in other parts of our catchment, to connect carers with one another, maybe not based on the types of placements they provide or the age group of children that they care for, but kind of trying to replicate that local catch-ups, local events for carers who live in the same community, because we can see already how beneficial it is for carers to have that. And also, I feel like the wider carer support team within AusChild, being able to see my role as a carer support worker and the Mockingbird liaison has been really energising for them too. Our work can often be, you know, problem saturated. So it's, I think, been really great for the wider team in AusChild to see how energising and warm a program like Mockingbird is, and what that means for our carers. It's motivating and something, you know, great to be a part of.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michelle. I have experienced that firsthand, and I had I guess, the fortune of meeting with your constellation, and I've seen it in many constellations, but just as carers came together and were asked the question, why did you become a carer? You know, what's been some of the biggest wins? And just to hear them share their story and to be listened to and have heads nodding, and almost every time you'll this was the case in the AusChild constellation. There's often always tears, just because people actually care about your experience. It was beautiful. Look, lastly, I just wanted to ask you. So, what were some of the maybe challenges or learnings that you could share in that early implementation, just that might help others that are considering this and going through the same process?
Sure. It really helped for us that we had the structure in place already that enabled Mockingbird to be implemented. We've got a carer support team. So the management structure, the workers on the ground, we had the resources to be able to, integrate Mockingbird into my role, which was a huge help. We weren't starting from scratch. We were able to put that planning in place in the lead up to deciding to implement. Our constellation has 6 satellite families, which I think is good. We want to set this constellation up for success, not only for the constellation itself, but also for us as an organisation to then be able to demonstrate how well it works and implement additional constellations. So having too many households, I think, would be a challenge. We also did some work not only getting information from those who wanted to be part of the constellation, but also spoke to the carer support workers who support the households who expressed an interest in being a part of the constellation. And that helped for Glenda to get to know them a little bit as well and think about the matching of households into the constellation. That was a great process, really helpful. It aided that process a lot. As I said before, the hub home provider is key. And I think in future constellations, we would put in some work to think about who that might be based on how well we know our carer pool. We would think about who would that be and then base the constellation around that rather than deciding the location and then trying to recruit someone to be in that key role. We've also, as a team, identified that communication and roles might be really, it's vital that everyone understands their role with so many different players from AusChild within who are supporting the constellation. So we've set up some regular forums for the case managers and carer support workers who support households who are in the constellation to meet. We've clarified roles. We've kind of done a bit of work in that area, and alongside the training that you've been able to help run for the team to get to know what Mockingbird is, we've had more kind of specific conversations about who's going to do what and what everyone's role is. That's been really helpful. Also, Glenda, our hub home provider, just because she's so warm and energetic and lovely, also invested some time in establishing some one-on-one relationships within the constellation, just to help those who are joining the constellation feel comfortable with her as the key figure in the constellation. And then that has really helped, I think, with moving forward in establishing a really nice rapport within the group. And we've also worked with our team to plan how we're going to collect the data for the monthly reporting. So that's an easier process for us too. I think we've experienced minimal challenges, but that's mostly because of the way that your support, Chris, and the implementation plan, the map that we followed was really just key in helping us get to the point that we have. And it's felt like every point along the way, it's felt like a logical next step to move on to the next part of the plan. So that's been key in helping us to get to the successful position that we're in at the moment.
Thank you, Michelle. That's fantastic to hear. So glad it's going well. Looking forward to hearing how it's going in some months' time. So we're now going to move to hear from Anglicare Victoria, and I'm going to introduce Kate Badham, Sarah Dakin, and Jess Herdman. And they've been a few years into implementation of Mockingbird, and we're going to hear, I guess, some of the experiences, I guess, further on, maybe a couple of years down the track, and some, I guess, unique, some maybe even surprise benefits that they saw come out of this. So I'll hand over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Chris. I think we've got some slides to come up for this as well. Thanks. If we can jump to the second slide. Thank you. So it has been, quite a lengthy journey for Anglicare Victoria, and we did engage in a process over a number of years prior to commencing implementation of really exploring how the Mockingbird model aligns to our core values as an organisation and what we want for children and young people and their carers in our out-of-home care programs. Moving ahead and establishing that our first constellation would be in the Bendigo region. Again, we really took a lot of time and planning to ensure that we were developing this successfully and that we were really setting our constellation up for the best possible outcomes. At this point, we've been in operation in Bendigo for just over 2 years. And it's been a really exciting development over that time. Going back to November 2021, Jess, who's online with us today, was appointed as our first hub home provider for a constellation in Bendigo. And following on from this, Sarah Dakin, our liaison officer, and Jess worked closely together towards a constellation launch, promoting the model within the region, and engaging other carers as satellite households. And we were able to launch the constellation in Bendigo in April of 2022. At that point, we had 4 families who were caring for a combined total of 10 children. And since that time, again, that promotion of the model with the added benefit, I suppose, during that time of being able to invite interested carers to come to an event or come to a meeting, have a sit down with Jess and really get a feel for what the Mockingbird constellation would look like for them in that area. And we've had new carers come and join that constellation, which has been really wonderful over that time. In May 2023, we had our external fidelity review, which Chris came and conducted for us, which was great. We were found to have a 91% adherence to the model, which we were really, really pleased with. But probably more pleasing, I think, was the really great feedback that we received from carers. There were a few little tweaks that were required, but we were able to implement them really quickly. And I think that process really helped us to highlight a great first 12 months of the program. But it was such a valuable opportunity as well for us all to sit together and talk about what was really working and what might have needed some improvements, and that sort of continuous improvement of how the constellation was operating in that Bendigo area. Moving forward to today, we've celebrated 2 birthdays for Mockingbird. We've currently got a constellation of our same hub home provider, Jess, and 6 satellite families, and between them they're supporting 15 children. I am going to get the slides put down for a moment, if that's okay, so that we can see Sarah and Jess on screen, because I have a few, sort of questions to ask them about how the model's going in Bendigo and what their kind of favourite parts and their learnings have been over this 2-year period. So Jess, I might start with you. We're 2 years into the constellation in Bendigo. What would you say you've most enjoyed seeing from the group, and how has that kind of changed over time?
I think that natural formation of relationships, obviously in the beginning, the adults especially were a bit cagey and, you don't know what's going on. Everyone has their own histories, but now 2 years in, we're such a close-knit group. You go to the park, the kids all run off together and they're, you know, looking out for each other, and the adults just are sitting talking pretty much until 5 o'clock at night. And it's just really nice to see that. We've got a chat that the carers are always popping up into, you know, pictures of the kids doing something crazy, because who else can you share them with? Just that natural progression, I think, is my big win from how the group has progressed from that early days to now.
Great, thank you. Sarah, what would you say some of the learnings were in that establishment phase of the model, and what might you kind of do differently, or what do you think was, key to success at that point?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So I think it's been a really wonderful experience working in the Mockingbird program. And I think since the beginning, I've reflected that in our area, that it is really important to recruit the home hub provider and the liaison officer early in the process, so that we can have some greater input into planning and execution of the constellation. I feel that greater oversight by myself, probably in the early stages of the implementation, would have been beneficial to support the recruitment into the constellation. I also think, as Jess just mentioned, in relation to communication with the constellation, setting up the group chat has been really great. So this sort of only happened maybe 12 months into the establishment of this constellation. And I think if we had have done that a little bit earlier, it would have been really great for everyone to have those discussions and cohesion and the sharing of photos, as Jess just mentioned. So because that's just, working beautifully at the moment.
Great. I'm going to ask this question of each of you, so you can decide between yourselves who goes first to answer it. But what would you identify as the greatest strength of the constellation, and have you seen any kind of unexpected benefits compared to what you went in anticipating the constellation might bring?
So I think I'm going to go first.
Great.
So the greatest strengths of this constellation, from my point of view, would be the relationships between all carers and children. I think it's really hard when you bring a group together who have different backgrounds and experience, but we've been very fortunate in the constellation that everyone has gelled so well. The children have made some wonderful connections. I think for me, the unexpected benefit that I would love to highlight is the connection that's being created with the biological children in the constellation. They are like best friends who have known each other for so many years. They want to hang out together and they want to catch up. They also communicate with each other separately to the constellation activities, which has been a real pleasure and a joy to watch from my perspective.
Jess, did you have any different views on that?
Well, Sarah pretty much just said all of the things that I was going to say, so maybe I should have gone first. That the teens, especially, most of the bio kids are teens, and watching them, like if one has a bad day at school, they're online chatting and supporting each other. It's really nice to see. My eldest recently supported one of the younger children whose carer's mother had died, and just being able to share that experience with him gave him what he needed to decide whether he wanted to go to the funeral and the wake and things like that. So that depth of relationship that they have is really nice. And everything that Sarah said.
That's good. I think if you've got the same kind of strengths and the same benefits, it's probably a sign that it's all tracking really well. I think I remember you telling me that some of the older kids and carers' own kids were feeling like they were missing out on respite at one point, so they started having sleepovers, and I just thought that was such a wonderful reflection of the community that you've been able to build up there in Bendigo. I did have one last question. It is for Sarah. I'm just interested in how you describe the running of that constellation now compared to earlier in the establishment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the constellation is running really well, and it has done for the past 2 years. But as mentioned earlier, the connections are really positive. Conversation is open, respectful, and free-flowing, and everyone just looks out for each other. I was quite involved in the first 12 months of the constellation's establishment, But I've taken a real backseat in my role now, and Jess is just amazing at ensuring that everything runs smoothly, like that respites occur, that the monthly meetings occur, social catch-ups, and that any issues that she has or anyone has, she has a chat with me about those. So I think my overall reflection is that the constellation is running like a real extended family.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah. If I could grab the slides back and just slide 4, and I'll finish on that one. Thanks. Thank you. Just sort of during that 2 years since we launched, and I think really the most valuable thing hearing from us today is hearing from Sarah and Jess and how well that constellation's been running in Bendigo. But obviously during that 2 years, we've also been working on other key activities across the organisation. So we've been promoting the model in our other 5 regions that deliver foster care, and working towards recruitment and training of liaison officers and hub home providers in some additional areas. Also looking at program evaluation and ongoing review of the operation of the model so that we can contribute to a continuous improvement process. Excitingly, at this point, we're launch planning for an additional 2 constellations currently, so we're hoping to have those up and running shortly. But we have, really enjoyed implementing the Mockingbird model at Anglicare, and it's so wonderful to hear, particularly directly from Jess, about how beneficial it's been for our carers. Thanks.
Thank you all, Kate, Sarah, and Jess. Fantastic to hear how it's making tangible, differences for not only the children and young people in care and the carers who are our focus, but even just the children of carers that are benefiting, who are often, not thought of and sometimes forgotten in the way our family-based care system works. I'm going to just let you know there's been some great questions come up, and I'll look to answer some of those and hopefully bring them up live. But I'm going to introduce our next panelists and let them speak to their experience. So Hanny Bruns is the Liaison Officer for Life Without Barriers in South Australia. Then we also have 2 hub home carers in Julie Critchley and Esma. I did practice your name, Gagliardi. I think that's right. So hopefully I did that right, Esma. I'm going to hand over to you, Hanny, and I'd love you to share, I guess, your experience. There's 6 constellations in South Australia now, and a range of, I guess, different incredible stories and outcomes. So, Hanny, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. I'm so excited to be here as a part of this webinar and sharing some of the stories from Life Without Barriers in South Australia. And so a bit of overview. Life Without Barriers launched the first Mockingbird in September 2021, so about 2.5 years ago. And now we have 6 constellations, and altogether that includes 56 foster and kinship carers, as well as 53 children and young people. So all these constellation has regular monthly meeting and at least quarterly social events with the children and young people. Just to give you some idea of some of the activities that the constellation have been doing. They have done a lot of different trainings together, and there has been many informal play dates and barbecues. And the constellation has also had like weekends away together at camps and camping. And both carers and children have reported that this is a really good way to really bond and connect, to have that time away together. We have had Life Without Barriers Living Arts team facilitate Aboriginal basket weaving and painting activities with our children and carers. And we've also had a song making workshop where children and carers created and recorded a very catchy Mockingbird song about what Mockingbird meant to them. And one recent event that I really want to highlight is that one of the Mockingbird constellation organized a birthday party for a 12-year-old that included cake and party games. And this was actually the first birthday party that this child had with other children due to limited peer relationships. we sent birthday invitation in the mail to all the children to give children that childhood experience of getting invited and attending birthday parties, and it was just beautiful. The center of these constellations are our home hub providers, and they facilitate the meetings and events and provide invaluable support to our families. So Julie is one of these amazing home hub provider in South Australia. So Julie was a part of launching a constellation over a year ago. So I would give it over to you, Julie. Can I ask, is there anything that you could share from your experience that might highlight some of the benefit from the satellite families in your constellation?
Yeah, sure. So one of the biggest things that sticks out to me when I sat down and thought about it was that the Mockingbird family can do things that other agencies and the department can't do. And I think at one particular placement, it was an experienced carer, but a new placement for her. She got a little girl who was 4, autistic, non-verbal, still in nappies, functioning like an 18-month-old, really. So that was quite challenging for her. Of course, with all of the physical challenges, there was lots of appointments. Child doesn't sleep very well. The carer also had limited family supports around. And as with most of the carers, got friends there, but they're not really equipped or have the understanding to be able to do some of the direct support. So some of the things that I've been able to do for her is pick up the little girl from kindy and just take her for a few hours just to give a break. There's been I've done some planned respite, also done some emergency respite where the ambulance was called one day where the carer had fallen and injured herself, had to call an ambulance, and so I was able to go and get the child and have her for a couple of days at my house while that situation healed up. So like things like that, and it was on a weekend, things like that DCP aren't good at, and agencies aren't good at. They can't just drop everything for everybody and just come running. And even during that time, I was able to just go around, take her a cup of coffee, do some dishes for her, just offer that practical support. Also the emotional support. There's been lots of, tearful phone calls and also the practical support from the home hub constellations. The constellations has been great too. Other families have had play dates with this family, mum and carer, but also supply emotional supports for her. There's been lovely conversations during our home hub meetings where she's been able to just sit down and just go blah with everything, and everyone's there to support her and give her understanding and help. So she has said that if it wasn't for the Mockingbird constellation, the placement would not be intact today. So yeah, it's just great to be able to continue to support people in these very practical, tangible ways. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Julie. So nice to hear. And I think it really highlights how Mockingbird can be that additional support for carer in addition to their support worker and other clinical team. So I think, and it also highlight how it can avoid placements from breaking down as well. So thanks, Julie. So I'll hand it over to Esma, which is another one of the incredible home hub providers in South Australia. Also launched a constellation just a year ago. So Esma, what are some of your experiences in the constellation and how it might have supported carers and children?
There's many experiences, but a couple that I'd like to highlight is like the children, the relationships that they develop is just priceless, and the way that they can get each other, because their life can be similar in so many ways. And I had two children making muffins at the bench, and one's talking about, I don't see my mum and dad, and the other's like, no, I don't see mine either. And that's just that understanding. And then they just went back to making their muffins, like, oh yeah, pretty normal, you know. And I thought that was really beautiful. And then the support that we have in the relationships we grow in. So we had a mum who does short-term placements, and it's really hard every time a child moves on. And she had a little bubba that was moving on, and we all went away to Nanu Farm, and we cried and laughed, and just that support. And, you know, she'll be coming over for dinner, and that constant support that we can give and give each other as a team is just incredibly priceless, and helps her to move forward, because we are all people who get each other, understand our love that we have for these children. It's that combined support, and we have support from you as well, which makes our life great. So yeah, there two areas, is that normalization of the children's lives, our lives. And it is quite different to other families that aren't in this situation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Esma, Julie, and Hanny. Just so rich to hear the experiences just every day. And I love that story of, you know, a child having their very first birthday party, and you know, having sent invitations out to many in the past and never having the, I guess, reciprocation of people attending. So a beautiful strength of being part of a community. Okay, I'm now going to just share very quickly. We're going to hear the voices of young people from one of the constellations in South Australia, and it's chaotic. I guess it's normal life, but this is just maybe a little snapshot of their experience.
So when I first came to an event at Mockingbird, I met Ashley again.
Yeah, meeting
her again after like 5 years.
5 years. Wait, are we talking about special things that we get to do? Birthdays.
Like
me. 2 friends.
Yeah.
And cake.
I like celebrating birthdays.
I like celebrating my birthday.
Excited.
Why?
Exactly. Because we get to meet friends again.
Like me. We get to like go to places like the zoo, which is fun. Like we went to the night cycle.
So how do our friends and play hide and seek all day?
Happy.
Yeah.
Getting to chill and hang out with friends.
There's one thing I know. Making friends is very good for you.
Fun.
And I am not social, so have fun.
I was working on my social skills then.
Yeah.
So just a little snapshot of some of the beautiful voices part of a constellation, and I think you could see that those friendships, those connections, just in the sound of their voice. Look, lastly today, and I'm going to introduce Helen McLaren and Michelle Jones. They're going to share some of their findings from the research they've done, and I'll hand straight over to you. I think, Helen, you're kicking us off.
Helen, we can't hear you.
You warned me about that before we started. Okay, so great to be here, and thank you, Chris. Here at Flinders University, we had the privilege of being part of this and walking through the implementation of the Mockingbird family in South Australia. And at that time, there were 2 established Mockingbird constellations at New South Wales as well. So what we did is we undertook over 2 years a series of studies. Can we have the first slide up? Okay, so we undertook a series of studies, and we didn't want to actually do a standard evaluation because it had already been done in the UK and the USA. We wanted to add value. So in the UK and USA, what the evaluations had shown is that this was a pretty cost-effective model. Maybe it didn't save too much money, but it didn't cost more money to run. All the resources were already there. We just needed to engineer and connect families to work together. And so what we did is over 2 years is we did a series of 8 studies. 4 in the first focused mostly on carers, workers and the model itself. And in the second year, we focused more on the children and young people. So we don't have enough time to go over everything today. We're just going to very briefly capture some key outcomes and observations from 3 of the studies. So if we move on to the next slide. In the first year, one of the things we did was attempt to see what was happening for the carers. And we took a systems perspective, focused on the carers because that's part of the environmental well-being and the stability surrounding the children and young people. And it was really important to understand what's happening for carers because we know that our child protection systems have a lot of attrition rates of carers and we're not getting a lot of new carers through. So how can we understand what's going on for them to maintain that helping workforce of foster carers in this space? And so we explored their professional quality of life. And so what we did in terms of exploring, we used a standardised instrument called the ProQual scale. And what this does is it measures the effects of work that involves helping others experiencing trauma and suffering, such as foster children and young people, and look at what's happening for them. So at the time, there were 2 constellations in New South Wales, and I think at the time there were 2 or 3 in South Australia in that first year. We sought, we gathered data from all of those over time periods. We also gathered data from non-Mockingbird family carers so that we could compare Mockingbird carers with non-Mockingbird carers. We found that in comparing Mockingbird family carers over time, as well as comparing them with non-Mockingbird family carers, that years of foster caring experience had a really positive association with compassion satisfaction. And that was in the Mockingbird foster carer sample and not other foster carers. We also found that the Mockingbird foster carers with 10 years or more experience had the best results. And so while we were working with small numbers and we really need to explore this further, it's possible to garner from this evidence that by bringing together experienced foster carers who have really good professional quality of life with lesser experienced or new foster carers, that it might have a positive effect on the professional quality of life of all members in a given constellation. So, for example, it could ensure that the quality of life of newer carers more quickly come up to that same level as those that have the experience more quickly than if they were foster caring alone. We also found that the professional quality of life overall was higher when foster carers, both Mockingbird and others, engaged in social activities around, the interests of their children and young people in their care. For example, engaging in with the children and young people in sport, in spiritual engagements, in community groups and so forth. And so by engineering and forming Mockingbird family social networks or these constellations, and including some carers that may need additional supports and may not engage socially in the same way, it could then actually have a positive effect on the newer carers or people that don't necessarily connect up with children's sports, spiritual or other community groups. So it's creating that social connection and that well-being that comes with it. Another thing we found, Mockingbird family carers experience significant less compassion fatigue in terms of burnout and secondary traumatic stress compared to other foster carers. The Mockingbird family group, this last point, is that women experience higher rates of secondary traumatic stress than men. And we're not really quite sure why, but literature informs us that the exposure to trauma of others affects men and women differently. So this could potentially guide all the different services setting up Mockingbird or even other foster carer supports to have a trauma-informed approach coupled with a gender-sensitive approach in supporting constellation members. Qualitative statements, as you can see here, exposed a lot of frustration with statutory systems, but it seemed to diminish in the foster carers in the Mockingbird family because they had that 24/7 support from the experienced carers and from each other that were talked about by the other presenters here. They expressed knowing what each other were going through, and many stood together in advocating for needs from statutory services when they arose. So there was a greater power and a force in working together than as single foster carers. So if we go to the next slide, Michelle can talk about some of that social networking and thing from another study.
Thanks, Helen. So in our second study, we explored the informal and formal support networks within Mockingbird families. We surveyed and held focus groups with foster carers, asking them who's in your support network and the types of support they provided. We used centrality measures, which show who holds critical positions within the network, displaying greater influence in providing support or information within the constellation. You can see those networks that have been visualised. We use measures in degree centrality, betweenness centrality and closeness centrality. In the longer running constellations, we found that the hub home provider was the primary source of advice or expert support. This indicated that micro-network evolution and potentially there was a reduced reliance on statutory and other formal support systems over time and the potential for self-sustainability. Overall, we found that Mockingbird family was found to provide social connections and support networks amongst foster carers, indicating the model's capacity to strengthen support to carers and thereby strengthening the immediate environment for children and young people in their care. I was being very brief. We can head over to the next study, or over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, we're almost right on time. And Helen, I'd love you to speak to the next slide in a moment. But I just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge the Department of Child Protection in South Australia and Suba, who really, I guess, helped alongside with Life Without Barriers and Flinders University to, I guess, fund this project. So, Helen, can you speak to maybe just that slide, and then I'll finish up.
Yeah, this will be very brief. So another one we wanted just to bring to people's attention is that it was actually Department of Child Protection said, why don't you look at what's going on for siblings? And so we did a little case study towards the end of the 2 years where we mapped out some of the constellation changes that were taking place and what that meant potentially for keeping siblings connected. And a few of our South Australian carers will recognise some of this stuff going on here. So we had 3 constellations we used as case examples. We wanted to focus, as I said before, more on what was happening for the children. And here is one of the case examples where we mapped out and undertook a particular phenomena that was going on. The focus was on how Mockingbird family created opportunities to either re-establish sibling connections and keep them connected, because we know from literature it's critically important to keep siblings connected so they have meaningful relationships with those they're related to in their lives, which can take them into their adulthood. It's just so critically important to keep them going. So one diagram here, what we're showing is in one particular constellation, where in home A, Anne and Arthur lived in home A. And while the constellations and the networks tried to improve the keeping foster carers in the system and reducing attrition, it's not always possible because carers become sick, things happen in their lives. So in home A, Anne and Arthur's carer, and I'm using pseudonyms here, Anne and Arthur's carers couldn't stay anymore. And each of them had a respite carer that sat outside the system. But when home A carer couldn't be there anymore, the respite carers had already had a taste of the Mockingbird. They didn't really want to be part of the Mockingbird, but they'd tasted it. They'd come to the monthly meetings on occasions when they could. They also heard what was going on for them, the children and young people that they provided respite care to. And when home A couldn't do it anymore, these respite carers came into the model. And so it actually kept the Anne and Arthur, those siblings, connected. Each of the respite carers couldn't look after both of them. They got split into 2 different homes, but they got kept in the same constellation, so they were still connected could see each other whenever they wanted, were close geographically, and came to community events together. Now, we did the same sort of mapping out with 2 other contexts. The second one, where one of the hub homes was very successful at forging pseudo relationships between siblings. And so what this is forming relationships between foster child or young person and another foster child or young person, having sleepovers, not necessarily at the hub home, but having sleepovers at each other's, or between the birth children of foster carers and others. And so when things change, it keeps them connected also. But the final one is one that's really critical, is that not all children and young people who are in care get the opportunity to see their siblings or stay connected. They're often placed in different types of out-of-home care. Some may be in Mockingbird, some may be in foster care, some might be in residential care. So in a third case we looked at, a constellation where the hub home provider had a child in care, yet that child had a number of siblings who were in residential care, who were missing out on this fantastic opportunity of making relationships, keeping connected, not only with their own sibling, but with the other pseudo-siblings within that constellation. And so slowly that foster carer, the home hub provider, brought those siblings into the home, into some of the events going on. There was a bit of caution because often the residential care workers would stay involved and stay, and eventually they backed off and didn't even come. So really good relationships could be formed there, engaging them in a whole range of activities that the Mockingbird family engages in. What we also saw was the ability to take in larger sibling groups. We had new carers that were not necessarily skilled at carers, that were taking on quite large groups that wouldn't have otherwise if they didn't have the support of that network that was available 24/7. And so just the last slide, and Chris will make these available. We could move on. We've done studies. They're all available, open access, and Chris can make the links available after this webinar. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Helen, and thank you, everyone. My apologies, we have gone a little bit over time, but hopefully that was a rich and informative experience for you all. I want to thank you, all the panelists, just for giving it their time and energy, not just for the webinar today, but sewing into this program in the hope that we're seeing, you know, great outcomes for kids and great outcomes for carers in the sector abroad. Now, Making Good Trouble is the series of webinars that the Stride Life Without Barriers are putting on. So stay tuned. Our next one will focus on family inclusion and reunification in a couple of months' time, and we'll let you know about that. I thank you all for the questions that were asked today. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to answer them on live, but we have actually typed answers back to those who who asked. And if there were others, then you can feel free to email stride@lwb.org.au. But I want to thank everyone for being a part of today, the panelists, and we hope that this has stoked your interest. You can scan the QR code on your screen right now if you'd like to find more. Otherwise, have a great day, and we'd be more than willing and happy to engage with you and answer anything further that you have. Thank you all. Bye-bye.